Right, I can't talk too much about my life or we'll be here a long while because I'm coming up to 88, so I've had a long history. But I was brought up at Rendham Hall, and my father came from Scotland, and he brought his dairy herd down on the train and set up there and built a model farm, and people came from all over East Anglia to see his crops. And as I was sharing with somebody down here, he was one of the people who helped to set up the Otley Agricultural College. I did my time in the army, and I would say that I've known Simon a long while, and his story that he's told you tonight is absolutely genuine. And when I came out of the army, I studied theology, and I had a big marquee that I worked in every town right across Suffolk, and we saw lots of young people come to faith, and many of them are serving God in different parts of the world today. And because we couldn't carry on using schools just in holidays, I prayed that God would help us to find a centre that we could use all the time. And we found Sizewell Hall, and it hadn't been used for 13 years. And we decided, under God, it was the right place. And I sat in the Angel Hotel in Bury St Edmunds with Mr. Ogilvy, who owned the property, and a solicitor, and I signed the papers to take it over. And all I had at the time in my bank account was £40. And yet I was so confident that God wanted us to use that place. And it's been a wonderful centre for evangelism, for ministry, for encouragement. And this year we celebrate 50 years since it was started. And then I was asked to be on the federal board of Mission England. Anybody remember Mission England? When Billy Graham came over, and he worked in 5 different football stadiums across the country. And the last one was to be Bury St Edmunds. And I said, people from Suffolk are not going to go up to Norfolk, so can we not have something in Ipswich? We managed to get 5 days at Portman Road. Did anybody go to hear Billy Graham in Portman Road?
Went, actually.
What?
A friend of mine went.
Yes.
Yeah, it changed his life that night.
Brilliant. Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
We put a lot of work into that. And so we had 20,000 a night for 5 consecutive nights. So 100,000 people went through. And I had the privilege of having an hour with Billy Graham each day. And he's such a gentle, humble man and an ex-farmer. And his story is really interesting because there was a farmer near the town where he worked, and he had got a real burden for the youth. And he was trying to take them into this big mission in the town. But one person kind of resisted it. It was a big, tall, lanky fellow. And he suddenly had an idea. He said, if I can get him to drive the truck, maybe he'll come. And he did. He drove the truck and he went in and God spoke to him. And that night he became a Christian, and his name was Billy Graham.
Was his name Albert Macon?
Yes, Albert Macon was the farmer who took him. Nobody's heard of him. Everybody's heard of Billy Graham. And I have worked in Israel off and on for nearly 20 years. And there's a wonderful centre there where we celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus. It's called the Garden Tomb. Has anybody been there? 1 or 2 of you have. And we have people coming from all over the world, and we get the opportunity day after day to explain why Jesus died and the relevance of the resurrection. So I've had a full and varied life, and thank God for the way in which he's preserved me and kept me. And so I'm here amongst farming people tonight, and just one little joke, which of course won't measure up to Peter's jokes and stories, but there was a farmer from Texas who met a farmer from the Punjab. And the farmer from Texas sort of puffed out his chest and he said, how big is your farm? He said, well, you see that light in the distance, that street light, and there's another one over there. He said, that's about the size of my farm. And the Texan farmer said to him, well, if you got in my truck at dawn and we drove till the sun set, you would come to the end of my farm. And the little man from Punjab, not to be outdone, he simply said, I had a truck like that once. Now I'm older, I have to follow a few notes. I used to have everything in my head and in my heart, and it would all come tumbling out. So how many of you still read a newspaper? A few of you, not many of you. Not many people are buying newspapers, but most people have the newspaper on their phone. I have the East Anglian on my phone, and almost every day there's an accident on the A14, and it's terrible. But I have a paper And the only reason I have it is because when my wife was dying with cancer, she used to do all the different competitions in the East Anglian Daily, in the Daily Mail. And so in memory of her, I still take the Daily Mail. And there's a crossword at the back that we used to do very quickly together. And I now play golf 2 or 3 times a week. And I'm playing with the men, and then we have a coffee, and we all do the crossword together. And there are 2 who are grammar school, and there are 2 who are from a comprehensive school background. And there's a big fight to see if the people from the comprehensive schools can get in first. So we have a lot of fun. But one day I saw a headline in the Daily Mail, and it says, "If you want to find peace, go west." And it caught my attention. And it was suggesting that if you went to Dartmoor or Exmoor, you could escape all the madness of life and all the problems and pressures that you have to live with. Maybe some of you have got health problems, financial problems, family problems, conflict at work, all sorts of problems, and they weigh us down. And do you think by going to Dartmoor or Exmoor, you could just leave all your problems behind? I don't think so. Some of you may remember the World War I song, which has been sung in every generation since. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. But is it that easy to leave your problems behind like that? There was a man called Edward Fitzgerald. He was a well-known translator, and he thought he could find peace if he could exchange his present life for his imaginary life. So fed up with his wife, he left her. Fed up with the city, he moved to the country. Fed up with the treadmill of work, he developed a program of leisure. Fed up with leisure, he kept doves, birds of peace, but still peace eluded him. And I guess we all suffer from the delusion that if only we could escape our present circumstances and problems and go off somewhere else, we would be at peace. It doesn't work like that, does it? And there was a man in the Bible who wrote in one of the Psalms, "Oh, that I had the wings of a dove, I would fly away and be at peace." But you know, wherever you go, that is not the answer, because you take the issues with you. And they're always in your mind and tending to be gnawing away at the same time. Because you see, the real world in which you and I have to live isn't the world out there of stuff, of material possessions, of status and position. And it's not really just the world of your work. You may find a certain amount of fulfillment in it. But the real world in which you and I have to live is the world in here, who we are inside. The people we know we are. And when we're alone at night, there are all sorts of things that we start thinking about and worrying about. And some of those things can actually consume us. And you see, I believe that the root cause of our human restlessness and lack of inward peace stems from the fact that we're adrift from our Maker, God himself who created us, the God who loves us, and the God who wants us to know him. And we'll never find real, deep and lasting peace until we find him. There is no peace like peace with God. St. Augustine, the 4th century North African bishop, wrote, "O God, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless till they find their rest in you." And he should know, because he lived a life of extreme luxury. He lived a life of blatant immorality. But there came a time when God broke him down, brought him to his senses, revealed himself to him, and he found the peace that he'd been searching for all his life. I'm a great fan of Bear Grylls. Anybody know Bear Grylls? Wonderful Christian man. And men don't come much tougher, so wrote the press, than the daredevil climber and adventurer and Bear Grylls, according to the Sun newspaper. He was a former member of the UK Special Forces, and his TV adventure series, Man vs. Wild, has reached an estimated 1.2 million viewers in over 180 countries. And if you read his autobiography, you'll be blown away. It's called Mud, Sweat and Tears. You'll be gripped and horrified at the things he went through. He survived the SAS, and he jumped out of a parachute and it didn't open, and his back was badly broken. But he recovered from it, And a year or so later, he was climbing Mount Everest. And he's very honest about his own weaknesses, struggles, and his fear of heights. And in his book, he states, "Faith in Christ has been the great empowering presence in my life, helping me walk strong when I feel so weak and giving me peace in really extreme circumstances." The search for peace. One of the most beautiful invitations that Jesus gave, you'll find in a book in the Bible, in the New Testament, Matthew 11. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." So how do you react to those words of Jesus when he says to you tonight, "Come to me and I'll give you rest," a deep inward peace that you've never yet perhaps discovered? You may feel it's a bit unreal, a bit like looking at a snow-capped mountain that's sparkling in the sunlight against the blue sky. It's there, but for you it's unattainable, unreachable. And some people feel like that about the promises of Jesus. They are beautiful, they're profound, they're wonderful, but they're outside my grasp. Well, to suggest that is to cast a slur on the character of Jesus, because he means what he says. If you come to me, he says, I will give you rest. And if you look at the passage in the Bible, you'll find Jesus has been surrounded by people. And as he looked at them, he could see that they were troubled and they were distressed. They were empty and unfulfilled. And you know, sometimes I stand outside Barclays Bank in Bury St Edmunds on a day when it's really busy. And I just look into the faces of the people who are passing by. And I see in their faces all sorts of stress and anxiety and other issues. And that really stirs my heart and makes me want to get out again into the world, sharing the glorious message of Jesus, that in him you can find forgiveness and deep inward peace. And you see, Jesus was the greatest psychologist the world has ever seen. He really understood people. He knew their deepest needs. He searched their hearts and he knew their thoughts before they expressed them. He answered their questions before they asked them. People were amazed at his understanding of human nature. So what did he see as he looked at the crowds? 4 things before I close. 1, he saw people burdened by religion. Do you find that surprising? Not then, because at that time the Pharisees and the other religious leaders were laying so many burdens on people. They had a forest of rules and regulations that they said you needed to keep to find acceptance with God. But you know, none of them would find acceptance with God in that way, because we can never do enough good to bring ourselves within the measurable distance of what God requires. We will never do enough good to cancel out the wrong things that we have done. And if we think we can go down that road, we're running into a cul-de-sac. And we're also suggesting it's not necessary for Jesus to come and die in my place. I can make it my way to God by doing good. And you see, the glorious thing about being a Christian is it's not about rules and regulations. It's about having a personal, living, ongoing, daily relationship with a living and wonderful God. And then he saw people burdened with guilt. Some people seem to be able to cauterize their conscience and have no feeling about the atrocious things that we human beings are capable of doing. But others are troubled and find it difficult to sleep. And it was someone who said, there is no French proverb, there is no pillow so soft as a clear conscience. And it must be awful to be lying awake at night and things that you've done, and maybe things that you've done that haven't yet been discovered by the police, and you're worrying and you're troubled. There was a day when a college lecturer came to visit me in my office, which was out in the garden. And I could see from the moment he walked in that he was troubled. He told me he'd been away on a course and staying in a hotel, and he'd committed adultery. He was burdened, he was guilty, and he felt he could never tell his wife, whom he loved deeply. And so he tried to bury it and hoped that it would eventually go away. And it was Freud, the well-known psychologist, who said suppressed guilt leads to neurosis. And that man found he couldn't sleep at night. And he found he began to get really tired. And he said to me, my bones ached, my strength was gone. He went to the doctors and they gave him pills, but that didn't answer his problem. I looked at him and I said, I was reading about you this morning. And he said, really? He looked quite shocked. I said, yes. And I opened my Bible and said, while I was having my breakfast, I read these words. And it was David speaking after he had committed adultery. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was sapped as in the day of summer. And this college lecturer said to me, that sums me up to a T. That's exactly how I was reading. And then I read on. I acknowledged my sin to you, O God, and didn't cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions in the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. I explained to him how he could unburden himself before God and confess his guilt. And he did just that. And he stood up and he said to me, a heavy burden has been lifted from my heart today, and I feel at peace. And there are many people who feel guilty. There's the burden of fear. And fear is a dreadful and demoralizing thing. It eats away at a person's heart and destroys their sense of well-being. So what fears are you facing? Fear of redundancy? Fear of a marriage breaking down? Fear of being found out for something you've done? Fear of failing health, even fearing old age, even fearing death. I was speaking at a men's event in our church in Bury St Edmunds, and I saw a man get out of his seat and he came straight to me and he looked me in the eyes and he said, are you afraid of death? I said, no, why should I be? Jesus has conquered death. I've put my life in his hands and he's promised to take me through death into his eternal presence. And I said to him, what about you? He said, I'm dead scared of death. And he was a real macho man. And he said, at night, I'm sweating when I wake up thinking about dying and what might happen. So I said, you better come round. And he came to my house and we had a good chat. And then he came down to the weekend for men at Sizewell Hall. And there he committed his life to Jesus. And his life has been completely changed. You can read the peace in his face, whereas there was fear before. And then there's the burden of frustration and futility. When Jesus looked at the crowds, he could see individuals who seemed confused and lost with no purpose in their lives. And he likened them to sheep without a shepherd. How sad it is that we can be wandering through life, eating, sleeping, going to work, watching TV, and the same routine day after day, but never asking the question, what am I doing on this planet? It was Mark Twain who said, the two most important days in your life are one, the day you were born, and the second day when you find out why. Why are we here? What is our purpose? What is our aim in life? You will never find true purpose and meaning, I don't believe, because you can only find it when you commit your life unreservedly to Jesus and start walking with him. And he gives you the strength to live a totally different life. So how do you find the peace and rest that Jesus promised? Come to me, he says, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I'm so glad he didn't say go and do this or that. The advice of many religious leaders and gurus says, follow this system of ideas, keep this code of ethics, practice this type of yoga, this form of meditation. No, none of that. Jesus says, come to me. And I love that picture. It's a picture of a child that's distressed and troubled. And mum or dad says, come to me. And they come running into the parents' arms where they find comfort and rest. And Jesus says to us tonight, come to me. He holds out his hands to us, nail-pierced hands, hands that still bear the scars of the ordeal of the crucifixion. hands that say, this is how much I love you. And he simply says, come to me and I will give you rest. I don't know how you've reacted to what I've said, but it's from my heart and it's from God's word. And I long for you to discover what I have discovered. And there was a man who, his name eludes me at the moment, but he was a well-known university professor. And he gave his last message to a huge crowd of young people. And he looked at them and he said, I long for you to discover what I have found so late in life. And I have that ache in my heart so often when I speak to a group of people. I long for you to discover what I have discovered and find the rest that only Jesus can give.